What's up, guys? It is the last week of the DFS show. It's a sad day. Unfortunately, Gerson is under the weather still, so he could not make the show tonight. But me and Tim are going to hold you down, so stay tuned.
Fantasy football, you dealing with the best. Keep it hype, authentic, this ain't nothing like the rest. With the Armchair Fantasy Show podcast, give advice for all the listeners to improve your stats. Yeah, we live on GoingFor2.com. Tuesdays and Fridays, this is what you want. Talking dynasties and daily drafts, and we just getting started, that ain't even the half. Yeah, so go ahead, tell your friends to join. Going for two, cause no one remembers the extra point. Hey, GoingFor2.com, the Armchair Fantasy Show.
What's going on, guys? All right, welcome to episode 124 of the Armchair Fantasy Show. I'm your host, of course, Geoff Lambert. You can follow me on Twitter at GeoffLambert77. We are here every Tuesday and Friday night on Facebook Live, Periscope, and YouTube. Of course, streaming in all the streaming in the Going for Two app and all your major podcast networks. I'm here as always with Tim. He's making it through. He's sick as well, but he's able to make it tonight. Gerson's a little bit sicker than Tim, and he couldn't make it. But Tim, how you doing tonight, man?
Yeah, I'm getting through, man. We're fighting through this together. It's the last show of the season. Couldn't cancel on the guys out there, so we'll hopefully have a better week than last week. Last week I didn't do too well. I don't know how well you did, but I'm hoping for a bounce back.
Well, yeah, I mean, if anybody watched the show, they know how well I did because I was in a different week the whole time. I was just getting the matchups wrong and everything else because I wasn't feeling good last week. So let's hope it's better this week. At least the podcast is better. I think my teams actually did pretty well, believe it or not. I didn't go real heavy, but actually I did pretty decent last week. So this week I'm going to go a little bit heavier because I've been really hitting my NBA lineups this week, and I've got some good cash roll to play in some NFL games this weekend. So I'm looking forward to this weekend for sure.
Yeah, I know we don't really talk season long too much on this show, but I survived in advance. I'm in the second round of the league I really care about. So I got a big, obviously, like a lot of people out there, matchup this weekend, and I'm honestly sweating that as much as anything because obviously if I win that one, I'm into the finals. So,
yep, good stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's get going.
You know, say I'm in 3 pay leagues, and I'm in the playoffs in all 3 of them. In my Writers League, actually, our championship is this week, and I had Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews in last night's game, so I'm sitting pretty right now. So sitting pretty right now. All right, before we get to the show, I just want to some quick programming notes really quick. I mentioned this is the last show of the DFS show. Our last season-long show will be on Tuesday, at least for 2019. We will carry it over into next year with Dynasty stuff. We're also launching a new show. It's going to be a 4 to 5 minute show, and all we're going to do is sort of profile all the incoming rookies this season for your dynasty drafts. So be on the lookout for that. We're calling it the Going for Two War Room. Should be out sometime in early January. With that said, Tim, let's go ahead and just jump right into the slate, man. Let's do the quarterbacks. Who you got as your top tier quarterbacks?
Yeah, my favorite quarterback on the slate this week is Deshaun Watson. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to him. I just think it sets up so well for him against Tennessee. The way you obviously attack the Titans is through the air. He's been so good lately. Last week he didn't look good early against the Broncos, but he managed to get a couple of touchdowns on the ground. Obviously salvage a 30-point day. He's coming up really high in my models, even though he's one of the higher projected quarterbacks on the week. It's kind of hard to say. Like you said, just mentioned Lamar Jackson. It's not on this slate. You do have Patrick Mahomes, but he's going against Denver. You never really know what you're going to get against them. Obviously, they showed out really well against Houston. So I think this is kind of the best spot for anyone to have really like a 30-plus point upside. So I really like that. He's probably my number 1 guy. And then number 2 guy I have on my list here, I've got a lot to talk about this week, and that's Dak Prescott. Cowboys are obviously at home this week. They're facing the Rams. I think that they're going to struggle to run the ball. I think they're probably going to get behind in this game, and that's going to require Dak to throw the ball a lot. Dak has obviously been much better at home. The Cowboys in general have been much better at home. He's averaged 28.1 DraftKings points at home and 20.1 DraftKings points on the road. I know we're going to talk about it later when we get to his receivers. There's obviously some interesting matchups there, but I think at 6,300 he makes a great kind of mid to upper range play if you want to save a few hundred off Watson.
Yeah, I agree. I like both those plays as well. I only had one guy in my top that you didn't already mention, and that's Russell Wilson. Now, if you look at DVOA, the Panthers are actually showing up pretty well, DVOA versus the pass. But it's because they are so bad against the run. I think they're 32nd DVOA against the run. And I think Wilson, I think they will come out and run the ball on the Panthers, but I think Wilson will have that super efficient type day where he might only throw the ball, 12, 15, 16 times, but have 3 or 4 touchdowns. I just think it's one of those kind of days for him. Obviously, he gets you a little bit of rushing upside a little bit. And at 7,000, because he's had a couple bad games in a row, I think his price is pretty good as well. So I think going to Carolina, I think Russell Wilson's the only other guy that I think I want to have in that top tier that I might play this weekend.
Yep.
Moving into the mid-tier where most of my favorite guys are at, we'll go ahead and kick off the mid-tier for the quarterbacks here.
Well, I'm obviously going to leave your guy for you because I know you want to talk about him. So I'm going to talk about the guy on the other side of that Cowboys game, and that's Jared Goff. Jared Goff, man, he's really looked a lot better over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we saw, I think it was, Sunday night or Monday night, him kind of look really good, even though he threw 2 picks against Seattle. He had a big game the week before against Arizona. And even though Dallas shows up as, they only give up his 7th least passing yards at 216 per game, I think that offense is kind of clicking right now. And the Cowboys have been kind of exposed. I mean, obviously, last week, Mitch Trubisky on Thanksgiving, or not Thanksgiving, on the week after on that Thursday night game, Mitch Trubisky looked really good.
Yep.
I mean, the week before that, they gave up a ton of points to, I'm blanking on his name right now, Josh Allen on Thanksgiving. So, I mean, 2 weeks in a row. I mean, the Cowboys defense just looks like they're falling apart. They can't tackle anybody. So I kind of like everybody on this Rams game. That's going to be kind of a theme for the show. I'm going to kind of pick on the Cowboys. And part of that is because of the over-under. It's one of the higher over-unders on the slate. I think it's the 3rd highest over-under on the slate.
Yep.
So I mentioned Watson earlier. I didn't mention this when I was talking about Watson. That Texans and Titans game is the highest over-under on the slate. I don't want to skip over. I know I didn't mention him during the time with Tannehill. Tannehill's just been amazing, man.
Yeah.
He's not a huge play for me this week, but if he ends up being the number 1 quarterback on the slate, I'm not going to be shocked. I don't know what it was in Miami that they just couldn't get right with him, but he's looked much better. I think I read that they're averaging something like a point per drive right now, which is far and away the best in the NFL. So definitely like both sides of that game. Whenever you see a 51 over-under, you definitely want some exposure. But anyway, back to what we're talking about. I love Dak. I love Goff. I love both sides of that game. And then the other guy I'm going to leave for you. So go ahead.
All right. So, yeah, the guy you want to leave for me, of course, is my boy Jimmy Garoppolo. This is for DraftKings only. I don't know if you've seen him on FanDuel. Jimmy Garoppolo is the most expensive quarterback on FanDuel, which is ridiculous to me. He's more than Patrick Mahomes. He's more than Deshaun Watson. He's too much on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, he's only 6.1. He's at home, where he's always much better at home. Of course, he's playing the Atlanta Falcons, who we know whose defense has kind of showed up a little bit more than recently. But I still think that they can beat that defense pretty easily. I think we want to run the ball, and I think we will run the ball, but I think Jimmy G will still get his passes in. On the defensive side of the ball, the Niners right now are without 4 of their starters, so I think that Falcons will be able to move the ball and put points up, so we'll have to continue to score as well on the offensive side of things. So I think Jimmy G's got to pass the ball a little bit more. He's got some good receiving options as well. Of course, you got Kittle, you got Emmanuel Sanders, you got Debo, who's been sort of a sleeper guy there. And, of course, we'll talk about him a little bit when we get the running backs, but Mostert's also very good in the passing game as well. So I think Jimmy G is probably going to be one of my more popular plays this week. At 6.1, you really can't beat it, especially when you compare it to FanDuel. I think he's 8.4 on FanDuel, which is just ridiculous price for him on FanDuel. But definitely like him on the on this slate on DraftKings. The other guy I have is $100 more than Jimmy G, and that's Mr. Fitzmagic, of course, going up against Miami this week. Going up against the Giants this week. And Fitzmagic, of course, you got the Giants and you got the Miami defense. Both of them give up tons of points to quarterbacks. It's going to be a game where I think even Eli Manning's probably viable in this game as well. I think I heard today that Parker is questionable. Devontae Parker is questionable, but I think he will play. Which helps Fitzpatrick as well. So I think that's going to be a good game to sort of target for a lot of value. And we'll mention a bunch of the guys from this game as well. Anybody else in the
I got to
mid-tier
give it to you, man. Before we move on, I didn't know that Jimmy G had that game in him last week.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody projected 94 total points. I mean, the over-under was like 42 or some shit.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody saw that. But when he kind of went off against Arizona, I was like, okay, it's Arizona. Okay, they don't play defense. Like, whatever. But, I mean, New Orleans has a pretty decent pass rush. They have some good players on defense. So I was like, all right, Jimmy, maybe living up to that contract after all.
Finally.
So, right. So, yeah, I like that play a lot this week. He was definitely on my list. I think that pretty much covers it for the mid-range guys if you want to move into the values.
Yeah, go ahead and move into the values. Who you got for your values?
All right, so the first one that comes up for me is Kyler Murray. He's coming off a couple of bad games, but I think this game sets up really nice for him. I mean, first of all, he's at home where he's played better this year. And second of all, he's playing against the Browns, man. And the Browns just lately just don't look like they have anything to play for. Like when Myles Garrett went out, like I feel like they just they played that one good game against Miami. And they're like, okay, we're good now. Like, we're done, And so I don't know without him if they have much of a pass rush. Their linebacking core is terrible. Pretty much all they have is a couple of good corners. But I think this might be kind of a bounce-back spot for Kyler Murray. Obviously, we know his best games have come when he's been able to move the ball on the ground with his legs. And that's kind of what's held him back the last couple of weeks. But, I mean, Pittsburgh's a good defense. I mean, they're pretty much holding this season together with that defense. And then the Rams were able to get enough pressure on him that he really couldn't do much either. So, I mean, he had 26 points against your 49ers. He had 30 points against Tampa Bay. He had 31 earlier in the season against Atlanta. So when he's played some kind of subpar defenses, he's done pretty well. So at 5,600, I think he gives you some salary relief. And then this last guy, I'll be honest, I put vomit next to his name because I just want to vomit every time I think about this play. But I have to mention him because he looks like such a value, and that's Eli Manning. I will admit I did not think that Eli – I mean, he kind of obviously scored all of his points before halftime. The second half he looked like old Eli Manning.
Yep.
But, we always say that Miami is the cure for whatever ails you, right?
Yep.
So, and probably his last game in the Meadowlands for the Giants against Miami, this just sets up at such a good spot at 5,200. I think he's got to be in play. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's projecting out for 18, 19 points, depending on your model.
Wow.
So we're talking about 3.5 times value. This week we're going to obviously talk about some value plays, but if you're wanting to spend up and you're looking for kind of a safe value option, as safe as Eli can be anyway, he might be a play there. I think that maybe DraftKings thought Daniel Jones would be back this week because they priced him a little bit, apart. Daniel Jones at 56, but I don't love Eli. I know some people have talked about him playing him in cash. If he allows you to stack every other spot, I can see it. But I don't know that I can go Eli in cash this week because I just feel like he's going to let me down. But I mean, he makes for some cheap stacks, man. And like I said, he lets you fit everyone else. So. Yeah. I don't think we can skip over that because he's coming up so much as a value for me.
Yep, agreed. I think he doesn't got to do much to hit value, that's for sure. And I think that against that Miami defense, I think me and you could probably go out there and play pitch and catch and put some points up. So definitely. So I got two guys on my value list that almost made me puke. Not quite as bad as Eli Manning, but there's two guys that one of them has played really well over the last 2 weeks. One of them had a really good week on Thanksgiving and had an okay week last week. But Drew Lock and David, is it Blau, however you say his name, from Detroit Lions. Their matchups are really juicy because they got, of course, Locke has got Kansas City, who we know will put up points, and we know who also gives up points. So they'll be throwing the ball a ton in that game. I think just pure volume based on how they're going to play that game will give Drew Lock some value there. He's only 5.7. And then Blau versus Tampa Bay. If anybody's worse than Miami and as far as passing game goes, it's got to be Tampa Bay. They give up tons of passing yards to basically anybody, so I think him versus Tampa Bay will be good. And again, Tampa Bay will put up some points, so he'll have to kind of keep up with them as well. So he's 5.3. He's $100 more than Eli Manning, so he's also viable for me this week. Any other guys you want to mention, Tim, before we move on to the tight ends?
Yeah, just real quick. There was a comment in the chat, so I wanted to make sure that we mentioned this. Obviously, Jameis Winston is questionable. They did say that he was able to get some work in today, that it looks like, he was having trouble with his grip strength because of that thumb injury. Coming off a thumb injury myself, I kind of understand where he's coming from a little bit. So obviously I don't have to go up against these NFL defenses, even if it is the Detroit Lions. If for whatever reason Jameis Winston doesn't play, I think Ryan Griffin is really interesting at 4,300.
Yeah.
We know that it doesn't take much for a quarterback in that range to pay off. Obviously, with Eli at 52, it makes it a little bit more risky than it would be when we're talking about everybody being 6K and above. But if you're looking for somebody, I remember like a few weeks ago, everybody was just jamming in Andy Dalton, and he was able to score like 12 points or whatever, but that basically paid off. You know, at 4,300, you're looking for 13, 14, 15 points to pay off salary. Anything above that is gravy. So, Detroit Lions is not a great defense. They're not terrible, but at 4,300, I mean, you're talking about a low-end value wide receiver quarterback. Pretty consistent value. This is a guy who's played some in the NFL. He's obviously got some good preseason games behind him as well. So, I could see it. I'm not going to play him in cash or anything like that. But if you want to put a tournament lineup out there, stack every other spot, and put in Ryan Griffin to save the money, I could see it.
Yeah,
so obviously keep an eye on the injury Sunday morning on that. So I do expect Winston to play.
Yeah, we have one more question from YouTube, actually, from Kyle. He wants to know, is Dwayne Haskins at 4.6, is he viable against Philadelphia this week?
I'm going to give you a little preview of our defense segment coming up later. The answer is no. The Eagles are my favorite defense on the week, or at least I think they're my favorite high-priced defense. I think I heard earlier the stat was he has 2 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. This guy's missing wide open wide receivers. I mean, in my opinion, he just doesn't look like he's ready for the NFL.
Yeah.
Sorry, 3 touchdowns, 7 interceptions.
Yeah,
so I want to make sure and get that right. But, I mean, if there was any team he could throw against, I guess it would be Philly. But they still have a pretty decent pass rush. And, Washington's O-line isn't the best.
Not at all.
So he's going to be under pressure. I think that we're going to talk about when we get the wide receivers. I think I like one of his wide receivers more if you want some exposure on that side, or if you want to bring back candidate if you're going to stack Philly. But I am not interested in Haskins at quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. And I think not only is it just the fact that he might throw interceptions, I think it's also the fact that they want to run the ball some more. I think Peterson and Chris Thompson will be very busy, and I don't think they want Haskins to have to throw the ball very much. So that could be why he doesn't get his point total. All right, let's move into the tight ends here. We got some good top-tier tight ends for once. It seems like we haven't had that in a while. So give me some of your top-tier tight ends.
Yeah. First of all, I want to start off by saying I'm never going to tell you not to play Travis Kelce, but he's not at the top of my list this week. There's only 2 guys I'm considering if I'm paying up this week, and that's going to be your boy George Kittle and then Zach Ertz. I really like Zach Ertz this week just because of all the injuries the Philadelphia Eagles have in their receiving core. We've already known that their default is kind of to go 2 tight ends. But last week, I mean, Ertz, if you watch that game, he pretty much won that game on his own.
Yeah.
It looks like a lot of these games where they've been down in wide receivers, they will just give him 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 targets. So for 6K, if you were comparing him to a wide receiver, you would say that wide receiver was underpriced. I mean, you're talking about Julian Edelman type usage for $1,100 less.
Yep.
So I think you got to consider him. And then obviously George Kittle, that play he made against the Saints was just incredible. But he does it seemingly every week. The one bad game he had against Baltimore, which right now pretty much everybody is doing bad against Baltimore, but Green Bay shook us up. Arizona shook him up. New Orleans carried the guy down the field. I mean, how do you not play George Kittle at this point? It would be tough for me to say. I think I would have Kittle slightly above Ertz, but for $200, I mean, I think it's kind of a coin flip in my opinion. Yeah, especially with the added volume I expect Ertz to get this week.
Yep, I'm with you on both of those. I like Ertz and Kittle this week. I mean, Kittle's he's been a beast. He's not even fully healthy. I think he's playing on a partially broken ankle still, so I think that it's crazy that he can be able to do those kind of things with an ankle like that. The only other guy I had, and he's sort of borderline mid-tier, top-tier, and that's Gerson's boy. I don't have the sound effect queued up there, but Mr. Darren Waller. I think the other tight end there, that Foster Monroe, has gone on IR, so that means those targets that he was getting, was like only a couple targets a game, 2, 3 here, but he was getting targeted in the red zone. Those now go to Waller, and then Hunter Renfrow, who's also sort of in that middle of the field where Waller works, is going to be out this game as well, so even more targets going Waller's way. I think we could see Waller kind of return to what he was in the beginning of the season, where he was a target monster before the Foster Monroes and the Hunter Renfros kind of established themselves a little bit more. I think Waller goes back to being that target monster against Jacksonville. So at 5.5, I think it's a pretty good price. You can play him and sort of be contrarian to those Kittle and Ertz guys that are playing a little bit more. So that's my other one top tier guy that I like this week. Let's go ahead and move into the mid tier, Tim. Who you got for your mid tier tight ends?
All right, so I got two guys here that I'm looking at mainly. One of them is obviously Dallas Goedert. I just mentioned that Philly's kind of go-to lately has been to go to tight end whenever they're low on their receiving core. I like Zach Ertz better even at 6,000, but I think Goddard makes an interesting play in the mid-range. I don't think he'll carry nearly the ownership. He obviously gets consistent targets last few weeks, 6, 7, 8 targets. And obviously, it's like that 4,300 is a pretty significant discount. He obviously doesn't have the upside, but I think that he allows you to get some pretty solid value there in the mid-range. And then for $100 less is David Njoku. This guy is really kind of popping up for me. Last week he didn't do much in his first game back, but when you're a tight end and you play against Arizona, it seems to be the cure. It seems to just all fall into place. So we have seen him earlier in the year get a little bit of usage. So I think this might just be a situation where it's, what they call it, the flow chart play.
Yep.
But there's another guy for a couple hundred less that we're going to talk about here in a second that I think is a better play. But I think if you're running, especially, 150 lineups or even 20 lineups, I'd still want at least a couple exposure to Njoku because he could have a game, 4 targets, but, 2 red zone targets and end up getting 2 touchdowns and more than 4Xing his salary just right there. So it just seems like, what was that your guy, Ross Dwelly, right?
Yep.
He played Arizona, and he had 14 yards or some shit?
And 2 touchdowns. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to exactly call for that, but I could see a similar stat line, 3 catches on 4 targets for 24 yards and a touchdown or 2 touchdowns,
Yep.
And then he more than pays off his value. So we're going to talk about it a lot over the course of this show. There's a lot of value on this slate. But if you're wanting a guy that I consider a little bit safer for value, you could also look at Njoku.
Yeah, agreed. The only other guy that I had on my list is Mike Gesicki. Of course, I mentioned already Fitzpatrick. He's kind of got a connection with him now. And I think if Devontae Parker is out, you can actually bump Gesicki up a little bit. He kind of plays that receiver role when Parker's not there. He's a big guy. He's fast. He's more receiver than he is tight end. He doesn't block very much. But he is also in play at 4,000 going up against the Giants, of course, who are not very good against tight ends either. And I think that he's in play, especially if you want to do a Fitzpatrick stack in that game. You can do that as well with Gesicki. So he's my other mid-tier tight end. All right, let's move into the value tight ends. Tim, who you got for your values?
All right, well, first thing I want to say is looking at our list here, we have the exact same 3 values for our tight ends. So that kind of tells you where we're all at here. The one that's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat is Tyler Higbee. This guy's just been insane the last couple of weeks. With Gerald Everett out, he's been playing almost nearly every snap. I think he's 90+% snaps over the last couple of weeks. He has played Arizona and Seattle, which are 2 of the best teams to target against tight ends, but Dallas is still in the bottom 10 in terms of receptions given up, touchdowns given up, and he's only 3,900. So he's cheaper than Goddard, he's cheaper than Njoku, and I expect him to have an even bigger role than either one of those guys. I already mentioned the over-under in this game. It's excellent at 49. I want as much exposure to this game, and he seems like the easiest guy to get exposure to. At only 3,900, in my opinion, if you're not paying up for Ertz or Kittle, I'm probably paying for Higbee. So depending on how my allocations work out, he's probably going to be my second highest owned tight end, and at worst, my third. So I think if you're looking to, again, save some money at tight end this week and not pay all the way up, I think it's either, like I said, Ertz and Kittle at the top or pay down to Higbee. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's kind of where I'm leaning as well. The only other guys I wanted to mention, just go on to your Dallas versus tight end. I looked it up just now. Dallas versus the tight end, DVOA is 29th. So you can't get much worse than that. So I think that's a great play there. The only other 2 guys I had, the value guys, of course, O.J. Howard finally starting to come on. I think the Mike Evans injury could even put him a little bit more in the sort of in that way. Not well known is that O.J. Howard actually has a faster 40 time than Mike Evans, which is crazy to think about as a tight end. So So I think they can put him in that sort of slot split out area and try to use him as a receiver as well. So against Detroit, obviously great matchup. Can't go wrong with that. And then Ian Thomas going up against Seattle, who we know also struggled versus the tight end. He had a good game last week. Olsen's already been ruled out this week, so Ian Thomas, of course, is in play. They didn't raise his price quite as much as I thought they would. It's only 3.1, so he's still pretty cheap there for a tight end. So, and they're playing at home. So Seattle coming east from the West Coast. Sometimes they can kind of be half asleep there on the defense, and he might get some early first and second quarter points. So Ian Thomas is definitely in play for me as well.
Yeah, I like that play a lot. I will admit that I did not see a 10-target game for him last game.
Mm-hmm.
He only caught 5 of them, but 5 for 57 and a touchdown at Ben Price was obviously an excellent game. Hopefully you had Ian Thomas last week. I know most people did. But I will admit, I had him projected for 4, 5, 6 targets. When I saw that he had 10, I was just like, wow. And then I don't know that you can really project that many against Seattle, but like you mentioned, they're pretty much one of the worst, or I guess best matchups for the tight ends. So I agree with you. I would have expected a little higher price rate for him. So I still think he comes in as an excellent value.
Yeah, I think DraftKings wasn't sure if Olsen was going to play or not. He got ruled out pretty late in the week, so maybe that's probably why they hadn't priced him up so much. But I'll take that discount all day for sure. All right. Anybody else we want to talk about before we go to a break?
Nope. I think that's it.
All right, guys. Hang tight. We'll be back. We'll talk running backs and wide receivers.
In the unpredictable world of fantasy sports, when all hope seems lost and chaos and confusion rule, one hero will rise. And change everything. Going for 2.com.
All right, guys, welcome back. It's me and Tim, and we are here ready to break down the running backs. Tim, real quick before we get to the running backs here, we did have one more question about tight ends from Kyle again on YouTube. He wants to know about Jonnu Smith. Any interest in Jonnu Smith?
I didn't have him on my list, but I think he's an interesting play. I don't love him. I think that I'm either going to go down to Ian Thomas or up to Tyler Higbee. I mean, I know both of them are going to be kind of chalky, but I don't know that you necessarily need to differentiate a tight end, and he feels like somebody who doesn't have enough of a ceiling for me to really consider. I mean, he had 4 targets last week against Oakland. They're a pretty good matchup. I don't think Houston's as good of a matchup against tight end. I do expect this game to shoot out, obviously, 51 over-under, but, yeah, I think it's Thomas or Higbee for me in that range.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. I think I'm the same way. I think that his price just kind of lends itself to play the other guys instead. All right, let's kick off the running backs here. Top-tier running backs. There's a couple of guys there that have kind of been there all season long, but is there anybody unique at the top?
Hey, one more thing before we move on. Kyle, I do want to apologize. Last week when we were talking about who to play in your season long, I think we advised that you play Mike Williams over Austin Eckler. If I remember correctly, obviously Eckler had the 100-100 game. I don't think that anybody really saw that coming.
Yes.
So I hope you played Eckler, because if you didn't, I hope you still advanced, because I was actually sitting there thinking, dude, I told that guy to play Mike Williams over Austin Eckler. So I hope that worked out okay for you there, Kyle. Sorry about that, bro.
It's all good. All right, man. So let's go ahead and kick off this top tier running backs. Is there anybody in this top tier besides the usual suspects that we want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one guy that made my list this week that has not made my list in quite some time. So obviously we're going to get the obligatory CMC mention off top. He's just, he's been the trademark of consistency. Last week he only had 24.5 points, but there's still very few guys that give you that kind of a floor. So I think, again, Seattle has not been good against running backs. Again, like you said, they're coming west to east. And they've been one of the teams that gives up the most running back targets, receptions. So I think that works out really well for them, sets up well for him. I think that they're going to have trouble throwing the ball against the Seattle defense. So I think it's going to be a lot of runs with McCaffrey and a lot of checkdowns to McCaffrey. So obviously that's where he thrives. At this point, he's over 1,000 yards on the ground, and he's at 726 through the air. I don't know if they're going to push for him to get one of those 1,000 seasons, but I could expect. I mean, it's crazy to project a running back for 10 targets, but I don't know at this point how you don't project him for at least 10 targets. So get that one out of the way. And then I think there's another top-end guy that I saw on your list that you want to talk about. So go ahead and convince me to play Dalvin Cook this week.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook is on my list. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dalvin Cook is the only running back this year that to not have a dud game. At least when you consider season-long fantasy, he has not had a dud game. He's been pretty much consistent the whole year. And he's quite a bit of a discount over CMC. A bit of a tougher matchup with the Chargers there, but I do think that that Cook is used enough in that passing game as well. Obviously, in the running game, he's their key. So I think Dalvin Cook is the way to go. And Melissa, I see you there with Dalvin Cook all day. I know she's a huge Vikings fan. She came on the show last week, so I know she's loving the Dalvin Cook call as well. But Dalvin Cook is definitely in my tournament lineups. I wouldn't play him in cash. He's too expensive in cash for me. But in tournaments at 8.9, a discount over McCaffrey, he's definitely in play for me. You got a couple guys.
Yeah, he was somebody I wasn't looking at early on in the week. But once it was kind of mentioned that Madison was going to be ruled out, I think it kind of where, I mean, the Vikings, obviously, their big game is going to be against the Packers, but I mean, they're still playing. You know, they're still trying to get a spot.
Yep.
So they have to try and go and win this game. You want to attack the Chargers on the ground, and without him, you know, they're still going to have, like, some C.J. Ham, and, you know, we might even see some Amir Abdullah. But I think that mostly this is going to be the Dalvin Cook show. They've kind of been setting him up for this spot. So I definitely think he could have another one of his 30-point games he's had this year. But I think that there's a couple of guys that are a little bit cheaper than him that I really like this week. And so I think I'm either going to be paying all the way up for CMC or paying more down into the 7K range.
All right, and you got a couple guys in that range that you want to talk about. One of those guys we haven't mentioned him in a while, so go ahead and talk about Saquon a little bit.
Yeah, man. So the two that you're referencing are Saquon Barkley and Chris Carson. I'll start with Chris Carson. Obviously, Rashad Penny was out for the year. So it's going to be the Chris Carson show. I mean, we do expect that he's probably going to get spelled occasionally by TJ Procise, but I think for the most part, this is going to be the Carson show. We know that the way you attack the Carolina Panthers defense is on the ground, and like you mentioned, anytime you see a West Coast team come east, if they can pound the running game, that's what they do, and that's obviously what Seattle loves to do. Run the ball and play defense. So
yep.
He's one of those guys that when the slate first came up, I saw him at 7,500, and he was one of the first guys that I clicked. And then the other guy you mentioned is Saquon Barkley. Somebody that we haven't talked about in a while on this show, and for good reason. I mean, his last 4 games, 9.7, 14.5, 8.0, 8.1. Not great. But as I mentioned in the Eli segment, everything seems to go well once you play the Miami Dolphins. So that's the reason I'm really looking at Saquon this week. I mean, I expect he's going to be pretty popular, but the way builds are working out, I think that people are going to be paying up for one guy, going for probably Chris Carson, and then paying down for one of the guys we're going to talk about here in a minute. So I don't think Saquon would be as owned as he probably should be, in my opinion. Obviously it's going to take a pretty good game from him to pay off that 7,700 salary. But, he's had a couple of good games this year. And like I said earlier, Miami just kind of fixes things. They are playing at home. His best games so far this season have come at home. He's averaging, almost 5 points more at home than on the road. And I just don't think neither one of these teams really have anything to play for. But I think he wants to have one of those kind of trademark Saquon games. And a big part of his game has always been the long breakout runs.
Yep.
That's how he scored so many of his points. And he just hasn't had as many of these this year, and I think that sets up great against the Dolphins. So I love those two plays in the 7K range. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to both of them.
Yeah, I got one more guy that's sort of in that top tier as well at 7.9 that I'm going to play. I actually had him on my list last week. He didn't do very much. I think he had one big long run last week that kind of saved him a little bit. But that's Nick Chubb going up against Arizona, 26th ranked DVOA versus the run. I think that the Cleveland Browns, they don't have much to play for left. They've kind of had a bad season, but I think with Nick Chubb, I think he's currently leading the NFL in rushing right now. I think that they want to get him that rushing title. so they will hand him the ball quite a bit. He gets plenty of volume against this Arizona defense. I think he's a good play. Hopefully he gets in the end zone this week. That'll definitely make his stat line look a lot better than it did last week. But Nick Chubb at 7.9 is going to be in a lot of my tournaments as well. You got one more guy in that top tier you want to talk about. I know your boy Uncle Lenny.
Yeah, I did have Leonard Fournette, and I think he's more of a pivot. I don't expect he's going to be as high owned as Saquon or as Chris Carson. He had kind of a dud last week against the Chargers. And part of the reason I think he's more of a tournament play for me is that the Jaguars have just looked really bad the last few weeks. He had a good game against Tennessee, but they lost that game by 22. Tampa Bay, I mean, they're obviously a pretty good run defense, but he didn't hardly get anything going. And then, last couple of weeks he's kind of returned to that, Leonard Fournette at the beginning of the season where, he'd get 3 yards and fall down and, nobody wanted to play him. So the big thing here is that he's playing the Raiders. And lately the Raiders have been giving up a ton of yards on the ground, not to mention yards to running backs out of the backfield. So I think that this may end up being one of those games where they just go back to running the ball with Uncle Lenny. So again, he's not a cash play for me. He's more of a GPP pivot off the higher ownership I think that both Barkley and Carson will see.
All right. It looks like the two mid-tier guys I have, we've already talked about. I had Fournette as well, and I had Carson at the 7.5. So you got a couple guys in your mid-tier that we don't have anywhere else, and one of them is a guy that's he's one of the top running backs that hasn't been playing well, and everybody kind of knew that coming into the season with this knee injury, but now all of a sudden now they're giving him the workload. Mr. Todd Gurley, man, talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, Todd Gurley. So one thing about Todd Gurley is he's finally getting the type of usage that we expected, or I don't know, expected, hoped to see from him earlier in the year. He had 28 touches against Chicago. He had kind of a down game against Baltimore, but pretty much everybody does. He bounced back with 20 touches against Arizona, and then he had 27 against the Seahawks. So I mentioned earlier, it seems like the last few weeks Dallas has just not been able to tackle anyone. They're just getting, they're getting killed. Devin Singletary had a good game against them.
Yep.
Obviously. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on with that team. I mean, they very well could show up here, but this is a team where I expect that they're going to run the ball plenty. He's going to get 20 touches. It's a high over-under game, and he's only 6K. He's kind of in that middle range where I think this is one of the lower prices he's been in a few weeks. Obviously much lower than he was at the beginning of the year. So I think this is more of a point per dollar play because I think he could easily 3X his salary and maybe even 4X if he's able to get into the touchdown and get a few catches through the air. So I know, as I just mentioned in the chat, I think most people are going to be playing either one of Saquon and Carson or Carson and Saquon and then paying down. But I think that if you're looking for somebody to play more in the mid-range, I really, really like Todd Gurley this week.
Yeah, I got another question from Carl on YouTube here. He's asking, is it okay to have Gurley and Higbee in the same lineup?
I'm going to say yes. And the reason I normally would say no, but I think it's a yes this week, and that's just because I think Higbee is just underpriced. And that's really what it comes down to. If you're playing cash especially, you really want the guys that just give you the best points per dollar. And right now, I think Higbee and Gurley both play a really well points per dollar for me. So I don't know that I'd have a ton of exposure to both of them. But if you're telling me that you're looking for that last guy to plug into your lineup and it just so happens to have two of these, then I'm not against it. I have a few lineups where I have Woods and Higbee, where I didn't initially have Goff, and then I was like, okay, well, I feel like I got to get Goff in there. But I think Gurley and Higbee, Gurley can hit value, and so can Higbee without getting into the touchdown.
Right.
So if one of them vultures the other, then they still could pay off their value without it. And I think they have a real good shot of one of those two guys, being the one that scores touchdowns. So.
Definitely. All right, let's move down into the value range now, and we got a guy that we both share here, and I'll talk about him a little bit, Mr. Philip Lindsay. I know we kind of mentioned him a little bit throughout the season. You had the great sick call early in the year where he was basically one of the winning running backs in the middle of their lineup, so that's definitely a good call there. But Philip Lindsay going up against Kansas City, of course, we already talked about it's going to be a high-scoring game. Kansas City will put up some points, leaving them to trying to catch up here, and I think Lindsay gets a lot of usage in the running game and in the passing game. At 5.6, he's definitely a great value that you can plug in there and get a ton of usage. I think he's kind of taken that number one role now. There's no more split with Freeman. It's a little bit more Lindsey than it is Freeman. So I think at 5.6, he's definitely viable there. Who else you got in your value range, Tim?
Yeah, your boy must start.
Gotta have him.
We were talking about it before the show. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan came out and said that Raheem is going to get, the number one role, if you want to look at it that way. He's definitely, as he said, earned more touches. And I really think that, he's been explosive the last couple of weeks. I had some exposure to him last week, obviously not enough. But he's just looked like the best running back. And I think I said that last week on the show, too.
Yep.
And I think that they're going to go right back to him here. I know that this year Atlanta's been pretty good against the run. But, so has New Orleans.
Yeah.
And he just showed off against them. So I wouldn't say that he can't do it. They're giving up 108 yards per game. And the best part is only 5,200.
Yep.
So obviously they have other guys in that backfield that are going to touch the ball. But you can reasonably predict probably 15 touches for him at 5K or 5,200. It doesn't get much better than that. And the best thing is that he actually gets some looks in the passing game.
Yep.
Last week he was 2 for 40 and a touchdown. I'm not expecting high volume for him in the passing game. He's been pretty consistent, 2 or 3 targets per week, but it still gives you a pretty decent floor, So, I think this is the floor of, 2x, 3x, and has easily a 5x ceiling. So I think whenever you're talking about that kind of a ceiling game from somebody, you got to consider it. So I like him a lot this week. He's probably my favorite guy in that 5K range.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I've heard a lot of this Tevin Coleman revenge game narrative, and I'm just going to shoot that down really quick. Tevin Coleman is now fallen down to 3rd on the depth chart. He had only 3 touches last week. He looks very hesitant when he runs the ball. He's not being used in the passing game. Matt Breida is back and healthy, so I think it's a 1-2 punch of Mostert and Breida. Tevin Coleman may spell one of them once in a while, but I don't think that Shanahan's going to force Coleman out there to quote-unquote get the revenge when they're playing for home field advantage in the playoffs. So I wouldn't look at Tevin Coleman at all this week. There is another guy on our list here from the Miami Dolphins, Tim, that you have on your list with some question marks next to it. I got him on my list as well. Go ahead and mention Laird a little bit.
Yeah, I know, especially on DFS Twitter, this kind of started off as a joke, but I think he's become legit at this point. Okay, so Week 11 against Buffalo, he had 6 targets for 51 yards. He got 11.8 DraftKings points. Then he had a terrible game against Cleveland. Then obviously he had the famous game, Week 13 against Philly, where he got the touchdown and the 2-point conversion. And then obviously they put Ballard on IR, and then last week he got 19 touches.
Yep.
There aren't really any guys I can think of that you can project for 15 touches or more at 4,500. He's Patrick Laird, so he's going to get you next to nothing. But the Giants aren't a good team. We obviously saw that they've had other woes at that one game. Chase Edmonds just ran all over them.
Yep.
And I obviously think Chase Edmonds is probably more athletic than Patrick Laird, but he's 4,500. I'm just going to keep coming back to that. He's not somebody. I've seen some people say that he's a cash play. He's not a cash play for me, but I think you could get some exposure to him in tournaments. Last week, I'm sure many of you saw the stat. He had more points than Alvin Kamara, more points than Leonard Fournette, more points than a number of these guys that were, more than twice his salary. So I think I'm going to find the 700 to play Raheem, but if you're looking for somebody in that 4K range to save some value and you want some exposure to this game, or you're going to go with an Eli stack and want somebody on the Dolphins to bring it back with, I think he could pay off that salary. He very well could, 4X that salary, and I got to give it to the Dolphins, man. I don't know if they're just buying into the bid or what the situation is, but I think he's a legit play at this point. I don't think it's a joke anymore.
I agree 100%. I do think that, like you said, he's not a cash game play. I think he'd have to have a 3 in front of his price to be a cash game play for me. That 45 or 4,100, whatever it is, a little bit too much for me for a cash game cheap running back that might not get a lot of touches. But I do think he gets at least 20 touches in this game. I do think he gets plenty of carries. There's nobody else on the roster to even get touches out of the backfield, really. So I think he's the man right now. So I think that he's definitely viable for sure. Anybody else we haven't talked about yet? Yeah, you got one more guy on your value list. Go ahead and talk about him a little bit if we have an injury situation.
Yeah, well, we didn't really mention it. I don't think we did on the show last week that Josh Jacobs was possibly out. Obviously, it kind of came out as we got closer to Sunday that he was possibly out and then ended up sitting out. So we saw that Dwayne Washington kind of filled in for him and obviously had a great game. He was really, really low owned. All the reports are at this point Josh Jacobs is going to play. But as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Leonard Fournette, Jacksonville has just looked terrible, particularly against running backs. Oakland is projected to score a pretty high team total. I want to say it's like 26 and a half team total right now. So if for whatever reason we get confirmation that Josh Jacobs is going to go ahead and sit this game, even at a higher price, I think Washington still makes a great play at 4,700. So I was just talking about Patrick Laird at 4,500. I would much rather play Washington at 4,700 if we know that Josh Jacobs isn't going to play.
Yeah.
He got 20 touches last week.
Yep.
I mean, that's insane. 14 rushes and 6 catches. So, obviously the touchdown helped him out a little bit, but even without it, I mean, he was, he killed his value. So hopefully you played him last week. You left yourself the ability to pivot to him in the afternoon. You may want to take an eye on that, but I think we're going to get notifications Sunday that Jacobs is going to play, but it's definitely somebody we're keeping an eye on.
All right, good stuff. Let's go ahead and move into the receivers now, and we got a couple of the big names here off the top. Go ahead and give us your top-tier receivers.
I'm just going to start with Hopkins. I mean, I kind of alluded to it earlier when I was talking about Deshaun Watson. Last week we saw, even in a tough matchup against Denver with, Chris Harris on him, he still shined. I mean, last week if you had Hopkins, if you had Edelman, and you had Michael Thomas, it doesn't really matter what you did elsewhere. You probably cashed. This is somebody who, has done well against Tennessee in the past, and, he's just looking better. I think earlier in the year, we were seeing Deshaun Watson not kind of have those classic Watson games.
Yep.
Hopkins having those classic Hopkins games. But he's been looking better lately. He obviously had the long touchdown last week. Obviously, that helped him out a lot. But he's 8K, so I guess that's the one hesitation that I have. His price has kind of gone back up to where we expected it to be. We can't help for him to be in the mid-7,000s forever. But, I mean, I think this sets up as such a good matchup for him. So I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Hopkins this week. He's going to be obviously in a lot of my Watkins stacks. If you can find a way to get up to him, obviously I would do that. But the next guy I have on my list here is Kenny Golladay. Obviously we got the news that Marvin Jones is out. And it just looks like since Blau took over, Jones is on IR, so obviously he's out. Blau has kind of been looking for Golladay. Yep. I saw a few highlights from the game last week, and we always talk about who's the quarterback's first read. And it looked like he would just take the snap, look back, and see where Kenny Golladay was and just throw it in his general area. So now that Marvin Jones is out, I expect him to see even more targets. This might be kind of a DeAndre Hopkins situation from last week, where guys in that low, mid 7K range, very reasonably projected for 10 targets. And we obviously saw what he did on Thanksgiving. He still had a good game last week against Minnesota, So I really like him. But he's only $100 more than the guy I just mentioned, and that's Julian Edelman. I know that some people are saying, this is kind of a get-right game for the Patriots. He's currently questionable, but he's always questionable. I don't think there's any real concern. And over the last 4 weeks, he's averaged 11 targets. So at 7,100, I mean, I think this is a get-right game for the Patriots. I think that people are like, oh, they're going to get up on Cincinnati and then run the ball. I don't think they can run the ball.
Nope.
I think at this point they need a game that makes them feel good moving through the rest of the season. So I'm not going to sit here and predict that the Patriots are going to put up, 35, 40 points or something like that. But I can guarantee you that they're going to throw well into the third quarter and probably the fourth quarter in this game. And, Tom Brady just looks for Edelman. I mean, even on the last play of the game last week in Kansas City, it was a great play by the defense, but Tom Brady was targeting Julian Edelman.
Yep.
That would have been another catch for another touchdown. He would have gone over 30 points and been more than 4x his value. So they left his price alone at 7,100, and I think that he's going to be, again, the go-to receiver against Cincinnati. So I'm going to try, again, I had a lot of exposure to Edelman last week. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Edelman again this week.
Yep, I love it. I love it. The only other guy that I had on my list is the other receiver in that game with Detroit. Obviously, Chris Godwin. We know Mike Evans is now out for the rest of the season. It's kind of a situation, same thing with Galladay, where he's basically the last man standing. I think that Winston's going to target him, a ton. And I think we see what Godwin can do when he gets those targets. I'm surprised that this over-under isn't any higher than it is. Right now it's at 46. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up a little bit more. I think there's going to be some fireworks in this game. This game can definitely be some scoring here with Tampa Bay and Detroit. I think they're going to throw the ball over the field. That's just my personal opinion on that one. But I think that Godwin, as long as Winston plays, if Winston's out, I don't like him as much. Right. But Winston's got to play in this one. But I think Godwin will get plenty of targets in this game. All right, let's move down into the mid-tier, Tim. Who you got some of your mid-tier receivers?
Well, I'm actually going to kick this one back to you because I want to know who is the play for your 49ers. Is it Deebo Samuel or Emmanuel Sanders?
I'm going with Sanders, and I'll tell you why. I think that Sanders is sort of Jimmy G's I'm in trouble, let me find out where he is, let me throw it. Deebo, I think they almost schemed to get Deebo the ball, which is a great thing to have for a receiver, but I think Jimmy G, when he's in trouble, he's getting a little bit of pressure on him. He's looking for Emmanuel Sanders all day. And I think Sanders is doing a very good job of getting open for Jimmy G. And I think that he's their go-to. He's at 6.6. I got him on my list as well. I think Sanders is going to be a great play versus Atlanta this week. I think you can pretty much take Deebo or Sanders and have a good stack there. But if I'm taking one of them, I'm taking Sanders.
All right. Well, good. I like Manny a lot too. I just wanted to see how you were feeling on the situation. So the next thing I took, and I seriously, if you could see the sheet, I literally wrote WTF Cooper Kupp. Because, this used to be Jared Goff's go-to, like you were just talking about. Anytime he was in trouble, he'd look around, find Cooper Kupp, and just throw the ball to him. And lately, that guy's been Robert Woods. He's cheaper than Cooper Kupp this week. He's been one of the top 5 receivers in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, 2 weeks ago, he wrecked the slate against Arizona with his 33 points. And then last week, he finally got into the end zone, which got him at 25. So at 6,200, I think he's going to set up really well against Dallas. I mentioned throughout the show that I think this is a game you want to target. You always want guys in those afternoon games. Obviously, there's no weather with them playing inside the dome. And I think that they're going to have to throw this game. I like Gurley. I don't know if this is like my call from last week where I'm just like, play all the Rams. But it's kind of a play all the Rams kind of week. I think I like Gurley and Higbee a little bit better than I like Robert Woods. But when I'm looking in that 6,200, 6,000 range, there's just not a lot of guys I see. I'm kind of concerned. I was going to talk about this when I get to Michael Gallup, but I'm concerned about Amari Cooper. Even though he's had really good home and road splits, he's obviously going to see Jalen Ramsey, or I expect him to see Jalen Ramsey this week. I like A.J. Brown. I've been talking the whole show about how I love Houston. If you're looking for a great bring-back candidate, I love A.J. Brown. He's obviously Ryan Tannehill's go-to guy. I don't know what the hell happened to Corey Davis, but A.J. Brown is just that dude right now. I heard somebody say he doesn't get phased. He drops the ball, he gets back going. He runs a bad route, he gets back going.
Yep.
And that's hard to say for, I believe he's a rookie, right?
Yep, he's a rookie.
That's hard to say for a rookie. We've seen that rookie wide receivers usually don't make huge impact in their first year. It's usually that second year that you wait for them to make the breakout, but he's just like, fuck this, I'm going to take over this team, right? Yep. So, they're projected to win. It's the highest over-under on the board. So, yeah, how do you not like A.J. Brown in this game at 6K? So I think Robert Woods, A.J. Brown, we mentioned Manny Sanders. Those guys are all great plays. And then one other guy I had on my list, and this guy is more of a bring-back candidate, is Courtland Sutton. I think he's been somebody who we've talked about quite a few times on this show because he's one of those guys that's just kind of shown up this year. If you're going to be doing any if you're going to be doing any Kansas City stacks, I think he's probably my favorite guy to bring it back with. So I'm not going to have high exposure to Courtland Sutton, but I think if you're doing game stacks, which I highly recommend, obviously I've been talking about it here. I like Courtland Sutton a lot. If you want to do, Mahomes to Kelsey, bring it back with Courtland Sutton, I think that sets up as a good stack.
Agreed 100%. And I saw Kyle mention my guy that we hadn't talked about yet, Mr. DJ Moore for the Carolina Panthers. I think he's basically the go-to receiver there if you're not including Christian McCaffrey. I think he's the guy that's going to be getting all the targets. He's finally gotten into the end zone a few times over the last few weeks. I think he's definitely in play for sure. He's the same price as Manny Sanders, so DJ Moore is definitely in play for me. And then Adam Thielen, I think, can be a sneaky play as well if he's healthy. I do think that the Vikings want to get him on the field if he can show that he's healthy. Before the game, I think he gets some good targets there. We know that Kirk Cousins looks his way quite a bit. That Chargers defense has been struggling a little bit versus the pass, so I do think that Casey Hayward will be on Diggs, and I think Thielen gets the other cornerback there, and I think at 6.3 you can probably sneak Thielen in at a pretty low ownership as well. So those are my two other mid-tier guys that I like.
Okay.
All right, so let's move into the value range. And you kind of mentioned two of the guys in your mid-tier that are in my values. A.J. Brown and Sutton, I both like them as well. So who else do you have in your values?
Yeah, one guy I didn't talk about in the mid-range because I wanted to mention him under the values is going to be Keenan Allen. I actually like Mike Williams more in this game. The Minnesota Vikings have just been terrible against perimeter wide receivers, and obviously we know Keenan Allen mostly plays in the slot. Xavier Rhodes, we talked about it a couple times on this show, has just seemed to really have lost a step this year, and teams have started targeting him. Whereas in the past, they just would look where Xavier Rhodes was and just throw the ball the other way. But teams are not scared to throw on Rhodes. And then obviously Trey Waynes either. Both of those guys have just looked bad. Honestly, Mackenzie Alexander in the slot has kind of looked like their best kind of consistent cornerback.
Yep.
So I think obviously Mackenzie is going to see a lot of Keenan Allen, which means that Mike Williams is going to see a lot of Trey Waynes. And so I think that sets up good for him. Obviously, he didn't get a lot of value last week, but he finally got himself into the end zone. And we know, we've talked about it again on this show, that when Phillip Rivers gets in trouble, man, he just kind of throws it up for Mike Williams. So
Yep.
I think, unlike previously, they're going to have a lot of trouble running the ball in this game. If there's one thing Minnesota does pretty well, it's stop the run. So I think that they're going to really struggle to run the ball in this game, which means that they're going to have to throw. And I think that sets up great for Mike Williams. So at 4,600, I think he sets up as a good value. A big part of that is obviously wide receiver, but probably one of my favorite value plays and what will probably be one of the chalkier value plays on the slate is going to be Darius Slayton.
Yes, sir.
We saw last week against Philadelphia, Eli Manning just seemed to have a connection with him from the get-go. 8 targets, 154, and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, you can't kind of predict a 35-point stat line for anybody, but week 10, he had 37. Week 14, I think he was your 6th call of the week that week as well.
Yep.
So I want to give you a shout-out there. Philadelphia, a lot of people I know had him against Philly. Obviously, you needed him if you played that showdown slate. And I think that against Miami, he may end up being one of those guys where you're going to look back and say, why didn't I just find a way to put Darius Slayton in my lineup? So
Yep.
I know a lot of people who are looking in the mid-range are looking at some of the value guys like D.D. Westbrook. But honestly, I don't think Didi's a bad play. I think I prefer Chris Conley in this game. But in that 4K range, I think you just plug in Slayton and figure the rest out. Obviously, you can pair him up with Eli for a super cheap stack. So, if you're looking for a cheap stack, like I said, you can go that route. But I don't know exactly what my percentage on Slayton is. I'm going to figure it out when I get closer. But he may want to be one of my highest-owned players just because of the fact that he offers so much upside at such a low price.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Slayton is kind of my guy. I actually drafted him in my Dynasty League, and I've had him sitting on my bench a couple games. And, this is not a fluke. I mean, I went back and looked at his targets over his last 4 games since Week 10. He had 15 targets versus the Jets, 7 versus Chicago, 9 versus Green Bay, of course, 8 last week versus Philly. Those are elite numbers for a receiver to get that many targets. I think you can play him at that cheap price against Miami at that. You definitely got to do that for sure. So I think Slayton is definitely my top value for sure. The only other guy that I had on my list, and actually I forgot to mention him earlier in the show, but I think Julio Jones is back in play as well because we got some injuries on my Niners squad. 2 of them in the secondary. I think both Sherman and Kwan Williams are going to miss this game coming up here, so I think that's going to open up the passing game a little bit. But Mr. Gage, who I've talked about a couple times on this show, I think at 5K can be a good play as well. He gets a little bit of volume there with Ryan. Obviously, Julio's still in play. He's always in play. He's Julio Jones. But I do think Gage at 5K is interesting as well against that defense that's missing a few key pieces.
Yeah, I like that. I like that call. I didn't have Gage, but I definitely could see that, particularly with Ridley out as well. They're going to have to funnel some of those targets towards somebody, and they can't all go to Julio.
Right.
Maybe they can. I don't know. Maybe he has one of those classic Julio weeks.
Yeah,
But
yeah. He hasn't had one
I
of
don't
those
know.
this year. I don't think he hasn't had one of those huge blow up games. I don't believe.
Yeah.
All right, are we done with receiver? We're going to move to the defenses.
Yeah, the only other guy I kind of mentioned, I do want to mention here. We didn't really talk about any of the Tampa Bay guys. You talked about Godwin, but obviously there's some people talking about Justin Watson. So I wanted to just mention him real quick. I'm not real big on him this week. And then we talked about Godwin, and then obviously when we talked about tight ends, we talked about O.J. Howard. I think those are probably my two favorite targets for the Bucs. And then also as a target, last week we saw in that same game on, I think it was Monday night, was Greg Ward get 9 targets for the Eagles.
Yep.
So he's stone minimum at 3,000. Again, he's not somebody that I think you can have a ton of confidence in, but again, he's 3,000. With all of the injuries to the Eagles receiving core, Washington is obviously not a great team at defending the pass. They give up, they're pretty average, but, I think that this is going to be a game where he's going to get way more, he's actually in the, going to get the practice time this week. He's going to practice with the ones, or at least I expect him to practice with the ones this week, going to be a starter against the Redskins. So you never know what you really can, with these kind of guys. Obviously, there were a couple of passes last week he just flat dropped, but, we're talking about a guy that's going to get 6-7 targets at least at 3,000. So I think we at least had to mention him before we move on.
All right, agreed. All right, let's go ahead and kick off the defenses here. And since you've been talking for a while, I'll kick off the defenses. My top tier defense is the 49ers. I think they're probably too expensive for me to actually play them at 3.8. We do have some injuries there, but I do think that our pass rushers are still there, so we'll still get sacks. We'll still get to Matt Ryan against that a terrible offensive line. So I think the Niners, if you want to pay up at 3.8, that's my top defense. What do you got for your top defense, Tim?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. My top defense this week is the Eagles, going against Dwayne Haskins. The Eagles, like I said, their big game is obviously going to be against Dallas, but I think that they're looking for a get-right spot here. We mentioned Haskins has more than twice as many interceptions as he does touchdowns, and I just think this is a game where they're just going to kind of roll. Sorry, Brian, but I don't think your Redskins really have a shot in this game. I may end up being wrong, but even so, I think it sets up as a great defensive game for Philly. And then one other high-priced defense, I'm going to talk about it here when we talk about stacks. It's going to be the Seattle Seahawks. I know I usually don't pick a defense that's going, west to east on a 1 o'clock game. I think it's 1 o'clock, right?
I believe so.
It is a 1 o'clock game, yeah. But Kyle Allen just has fallen off a cliff over the last month. He's given up the second most sacks of any quarterback in the league. And the Seahawks, they're going to be coming. Obviously, that West division is so tight. They need this one big. So I think that obviously they're the third highest priced defense. It's going to be tough to get up to them. You can save 300 and go down to the Eagles. But same thing you were talking about with your 49ers. I don't really know how you can find it, especially in cash. But if you're looking for a tournament stack, I like the idea of running Chris Carson with the Seahawks and just hoping that they get up big in that game, force Kyle Allen to drop back 30, 40 times, and maybe get a couple of picks or a fumble and return one for a touchdown. So.
Yeah, I love that call. Moving into the mid-tier, I got your boys, the Packers. Playing the Bears this week. I think Trubisky turns back into a pumpkin this week and turns the ball over. It goes back to what he was basically all season up until these last few games. So the Packers, for me, are in that 3K range, are a good mid-tier defense as well if you want to play that mid-tier. Moving down to those value guys, those cheap guys, you got a couple on your list, Tim. Who you got?
Yeah, real quick, I do want to mention, Brian mentioned, are we really ignoring the Patriots? Obviously they are the number one scoring defense this year. Their average points per game is 15.5, so I don't think you can ignore them completely. But I don't know if this sets. It's going to be tough for me. I think if you're talking about tournament stats, I think that you can definitely play the Patriots. But at 4K, I think it's tough to get to in cash. I really think in cash this week, it's a pay down for defense week. And I have two defenses. One we already talked about is the Detroit Lions. Whether they play Ryan Griffin or the banged-up Jameis Winston, I think this sets up as a good game for them at home. I think that, especially Jameis we saw last week, he had a great game, but he also threw, I think, 3 picks. And Ryan Griffin obviously is, going to be, if he's thrust in there at the last moment, he has the potential for sacks, turning the ball over. And then for $100 left, I also really like Arizona Cardinals. So Again, I think that Baker Mayfield is somebody who's kind of turnover prone as well. And Arizona's actually gotten a few sacks in the last few weeks.
Yep.
And again, we're talking about paying all the way down 2,300. These guys only need a couple of sacks, maybe a fumble or two, and they've more than paid off their salary. We're not talking about they need a defensive touchdown or anything like, the Patriots would probably need to be able to pay off that salary. So, if you want to pay up for quarterback, if you don't want to punt two of your wide receivers, if you want to pay up at tight end, you're looking for somewhere where you can get some points and be able to pay down. I really think the Lions and Cardinals both make excellent options this week.
Yeah, I got one more defense in that value range that probably no one's thinking about, and honestly, I wasn't really thinking about them either until someone pointed it out to me. But the Washington Redskins at 2.6. Look over the last couple of weeks here. So this is their last 3 games. This is their sack total: 6 versus Detroit, 7 versus Carolina, and they sacked your boy Rodgers 4 times last week. That's pretty good for a defense at 2.6. They've also had a few turnovers. Obviously, they didn't turn over Aaron Rodgers at all because he doesn't throw picks. But against Carolina, they had a pick. Against Detroit, they had 3 picks. Going back to the Jets, they had a pick. They also had a couple fumble recoveries in those games. Their point total was pretty decent. They had 7 versus Green Bay, 11 versus Carolina, 21 versus Detroit, and this week they get Philadelphia. It's obviously a division game. We haven't seen the Eagles be a very dominant offense like we have in the past. They got some injuries. Alshon Jeffrey's not going to be there. So the Redskins are a sneaky pick for me, I think, at 2.6 there, going at home versus Philadelphia. So that's my value pick there. Is anybody else you wanted to mention, Tim?
No, that's really it. I just wanted to mention, since I didn't talk about it when I was talking about the Cardinals, in the last 3 weeks, Baker Mayfield has 4 interceptions. He's had 1 consistently, and then he had 2 against the Bengals. The Bengals picked him off twice. And then the only other thing is that in 6 away games this year, he's had 6 interceptions. So he's had 16 on the year. I mean, he's obviously taken a big step back from last year. He's had a couple of games this year where he's had 3 interceptions. And he's also lost a few fumbles this year. So, I mean, again, I think the Cardinals, also set up as a great spot here. I think the Lions I have slightly higher, but I always say it seems like, and we've talked about this before, you put your lineup together and you are $100 over. If that's what your situation is, you have the Lions in there and you're $100 over and you don't want to change any other spot, I think you can drop down to the Cardinals with some degree of confidence.
Yeah, I like that call as well. All right, let's do the stacks.
And now, the stacks of the week.
All right, Tim, let's go to you. What is your stack of the week?
Shocker. I've talked about everybody here, but no, it's not a shocker at all. My favorite stack this week is Deshaun Watson, Hopkins, and bringing it back with A.J. Brown. It's the number 1 over-under game on the week. It's going to be a popular stack, but I think that you're going to want to have some exposure to it. I mean, these 3 guys could very easily put up, 70, 80 points. I'm not predicting that by any means, but they have that kind of an upside, which you always want some exposure to in tournaments. And then one other stack that I had listed here, I didn't actually mention the wide receiver I think I mentioned him briefly when we were talking about wide receivers, and that's Michael Gallup. I already mentioned that I expect Amari Cooper to be shadowed by Jalen Ramsey, which I think is going to give Gallup a lot of time against Troy Hill. Troy Hill is playing better this year, but I think that the Cowboys are going to game plan to try and get Michael Gallup more targets this week. So my stack here is going to be Dak to Gallup, and then you can bring that back with Higbee's obviously the easiest option, but you could also go Robert Woods or Todd Gurley.
Yep, I agree. I like that stack as well, and that's actually one I looked at before I picked mine. And the 2 that I got, I talked about most of these guys tonight as well, is obviously my boy Jimmy G with George Kittle. And then you can bring it back with Julio if you want to go expensive, or you can even go back with Gage if you want to go a little bit cheaper and get some more of those other guys in there. But I think that's going to be a decent stack and probably pretty low owned as well. And then the other one I got is Jameis Winston if he plays with Godwin, and then bringing it back with Galladay. Like I said, I think this game will be higher than the 46 over-under that's at right now. I think it's probably gets closer to the 50 over-under. I think that Detroit can't run the ball versus that Tampa Bay defense, which will cause them to throw the ball more, which could cause a lot more turnovers, and score can kind of go up there from there. So those are my 2 stacks of the week there. All right, it's time for the last sick call of the year.
And now, the sick call of the week.
All right, Tim, who you got for your sick call this week?
It's kind of appropriate that this is the last sick call of the year because this is also the last home game for the Arizona Cardinals, and it very well may be the last home game ever for one Larry Fitzgerald. So I'm going to go a little bit, take a stroll down narrative street here and say that the Arizona Cardinals work to try and get Larry Fitzgerald some targets in this game. He's only 4,300, so it's a bit of a sick call. He's not real expensive. He gives you some, exposure to that Arizona Cardinals game. And if you needed another reason other than narrative street, the outside corners for the Cleveland Browns are actually pretty good. Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward. I think Christian Kirk is going to have a tough time with Denzel Ward. The best matchup ends up being Eric Murphy in the slot, which obviously is where Larry Fitzgerald primarily plays. Usually this time of year, I don't even look at Larry Fitzgerald. He's somebody you play early in the year and then forget about him. But over the last few weeks, he's had 8 targets, 5 targets, 7 targets, 7 targets. And I think that they're going to try and find a way to get him in the end zone on his last, what I expect to be his last game in a Cardinal uniform in Arizona. So, I think that's my sick call of the week, Larry Fitzgerald.
All right, yeah, that's a great sick call. And I didn't even think about that angle with the home game and possibly being his last game. So good call there. My sick call, I'm going back to that Washington Redskins game, Mr. Chris Thompson. Obviously, Darius Geis done for the year, so that gives Thompson pretty much free reign of the position, of third down back. Peterson's not going to catch any passes out of the backfield, so it'll be the AP and Thompson show. They don't want to put the ball in Haskins' hands as much as possible, so I think it'd be about a lot of checkdowns. He had 8 targets last week, 7 receptions for 43 yards. I think he can get similar production there. I think maybe even a little bit more. And he's at 3.9 on DraftKings. And if he gets, those 8 to 10 targets at that price point, I think he can definitely pay off his value for sure. He may even find the end zone on one of them, as long as he can stay on the field. I think health has always been his problem. Once he's healthy, he's productive. So at 3.9, he's a sneaky play for me. All right, guys, that wraps up the final show. Yes, we will not have a show next week for the DFS show, unfortunately. Scheduling issues have kind of come up here, and we can't do a week 16. We never do week 17 because it's just too hard to predict anything with all the people sitting, resting everybody and all that good stuff. But we will continue the season-long show into the new year. Like I mentioned, guys, check out the Going for 2 War Room starting in January. We'll profile some of the 2020 prospects for your Dynasty leagues. Tim, one last time, man, give us where we can find you at.
Yeah, guys. So we will not have a show, as Geoff mentioned, moving forward, but we will still have plenty of content in the DFS Roundtable group on Facebook. So if you're looking for if you're looking for a matchup decision, a season-long decision, a DFS decision, feel free to ask it to us, the DFS Roundtable, a.k.a. the Fantasy G Podcast. And then you can always shoot me your questions on Twitter at KetoDFS.
All right, good stuff. And real quick, Aaron asked me, what's next for Going for 2. He missed the beginning of the show. We do have a show, like I said, the Going for 2 War Room starting. It'll be 4 to 5 minute shows, really quick shows talking about the rookies coming up in this draft for your Dynasty leagues. Unfortunately, there won't be any DFS. We tried to do NBA last year. It just didn't work out. You just don't know enough the night before an NBA game to really do a DFS podcast. So the DFS show will not be back until next season, but I do appreciate everybody tuning in every Friday night to watch us, and I wish Gerson could have been here as well to send this off, but unfortunately he is just deathly ill right now. He's got a fever. He had to leave work early in the whole 9. So get better, Gerson, and we'll see y'all in the chat room. That's a wrap.
Thanks for watching, and go Pack, go!